Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Having discussed various items during the expert panels and having seen also various presentations today, we are happy to open our afternoon plenary session of the conference. As mentioned during the morning session, we're going to start with the summaries and conclusions of the expert panels, and it will be followed by two presentations about the use of technologies in education. I will try very briefly to summarize what has been discussed today in the expert panels. Expert panel called Contemporary Curriculum in Science and Mathematics Education for the Upper Secondary Education discussed curriculum models in various countries like Finland, Estonia, Latvia and Poland. It was mentioned that curriculum is a process and sometimes it is driven by the demands of the society. Projects that aim to improve quality of education were also presented in this expert panel. Expert panel called Student-Focused Classroom in Science and Mathematics Problems of Implementation discussed various approaches, methods and resources needed for a student-focused classroom. Several examples were presented and challenging situations were discussed, offering a wide range of experiences from different countries. Expert panel called Benefits and Problems for ICT Usage in Science and Mathematics Teaching and Learning Process raised the issues of ICT's resource accessibility and their impact on students' achievements and motivation. The issues of computer literacy, drawbacks of use of ICTs were also discussed. A group also shared information about ICT resources available for science and mathematics education. Expert panel called Innovations in Professional Development Activities for Science and Mathematics Teachers, Problems of Implementation, discussed possible solutions to improve pre-service and in-service teacher education. It was mentioned that necessary innovations could come through flexible module-based study programs and using mentoring as a tool to support future teachers and to promote teacher professional development. It was also expressed that teacher training should belong to universities as they can guarantee the necessary basis of academic knowledge. In this light, the issue of sustainability of teacher development projects was raised by the audience. Several existing experiences in teacher education were also presented. The expert panel called Challenge for Stakeholders Involvement in Educational Reforms for Science, Mathematics and Technology emphasized during the presentations that there is clear demand from society, especially business sector, for the new type of person who has positive attitude, creative thinking, communication skills and is ready to engage actively in processes in the society. Meanwhile, it is crucial to have basic knowledge about the world and processes in it. There is some competition between schools and outside world. It can be used productively to improve quality of education and to improve links between life and learning. Building partnerships between schools and entrepreneurs or business people is the task number one. They have to be long-term and meaningful in order to be mutually beneficial. It is important to promote balance between logic and emotions, theory and practices. If a child or a student is in the center, the role of motivation is crucial. Moreover, experiences from several organizations and places were shared. This was a very brief overview of what was discussed in the expert panels, and now allow me to move forward.
The project fosters also effective use of information technologies in the study process. Students can use various electronic interactive study aids, and they have the opportunity to watch study films during the lessons to illustrate certain study topics in the real life. The teachers can use methodological support aids and a wide range of electronic materials, which include presentations, animations, virtual laboratories, and materials for the interactive whiteboard.
Diversity of information and communication technologies and their purposeful use foster acquirement of science and mathematics. As a result of the project, a set of materials have been elaborated which include presentations, animations, interactive materials for students, visual aids and whiteboard materials. Our first presenter this afternoon is Mr. Dendev Badarch, who is a UNESCO representative to Russian Federation and a director of UNESCO office in Moscow. He is also an acting director of UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education. Prior to joining UNESCO, Mr. Badarch was a rector and a president of the Mongolian Technical University. He is also a founder and a president of the Consortium of Mongolian Universities and Colleges. Mr. Badarch holds a doctoral degree in management information systems and computer sciences, and he is an author of various articles and publications on higher education, engineering and science issues. So, Mr. Badarch, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I am honored to join you for this very interesting Science, Technology, Education Summit 2011. First of all, I would like to thank the Latvian National Commission for UNESCO for very efficient cooperation with UNESCO, particularly with the UNESCO Moscow office and also UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education. The Latvian National Commission for UNESCO reaches into all parts of the country. A number of interesting projects involve many people in furthering the noble values around which UNESCO was created. I also would like to congratulate the Ministry of Education, Latvia, for its vision for science and technology education and successful implementation of its national action plan. Now I would like to say some words about the content of this conference. The theme of this conference is relevant to UNESCO because since its early stage, UNESCO has made the improvement of science education as a priority. The issues related to mathematics, science, and technology education were raised at the World Conference on Science in Budapest 1999, the World Conference on Science and Technology Education in Perth, Western Australia 2007, and the World Conference on Higher Education in 2009 in Paris, and many other national and international meetings on science and technology education around the world. The last year, UNESCO has produced the World Science Report, which addresses the issues concerning to science and technology. This report underlines the democratization and internationalization of science and the need to build capacity in science and technology for development. According to this report, the internet access rose between 2002 and 2008 worldwide from 11% to 24%. For the developed countries, from 38% to 62%. For the developing countries, from 5% to 17%. Also, the two-way flow of information, knowledge, technology, investment, and personnel is leading to stronger research collaboration, more international co-authorship, more partnership, and more competitive environment. According to another report, which was also issued last year by UNESCO, a report on engineering, there is the disturbing decline of interest among young people in science at the secondary level, and fewer young people are going into science and engineering courses at the university level in many countries around the world. This applies particularly to mathematics, physics, chemistry, and all areas of engineering. It also has a gender dimension in many countries. Now I would like to give brief information on the Institute, UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education, which is situated in Moscow, in order to understand for you what we are doing in the field of ICT in education. Because I am representing this institute right now, and the main activities of the institute are the policy research and capacity development and knowledge sharing. In the field of policy research, we are producing the policy analytical studies, policy briefs on different emerging issues, and also we are organizing the high-level policy meeting. The next one will be in December in Baku, Azerbaijan. Also, we are producing some analytical studies on different issues. We are started to implement the 3 years project on ICTs in primary education. 8 prominent experts in this field from all over the world invited to be in the group of experts, and they are working on the new project on ICTs in primary education. We're also looking at the ICTs opportunities and challenges using for education for special needs. Then, concerning to the capacity development, we are mostly concerning the training and professional development of teachers, and also we are producing some training materials for teachers. One of the projects which we are now implementing is the teachers of the Arctic. Also, we working with the IT companies and the academic organizations in the universities and public and private sector. Concerning the knowledge services, we have several series of publications. One of them is Theoretical Aspects of ICT in Education. The first publication devoted to the media education, and also the best practices series. We have looked at the e-learning in the Republic of Korea is one of the best practices of implementing e-learning in nationwide. Recently, we started a new project on open educational resources, and that is one of the priority areas for our institute, and we have provided some analytical survey. What is the current status of OER development in CIS countries and some other non-English speaking countries? So currently we are looking at the best practices in this area in such countries like Brazil, Turkey, China, Lithuania, Spain. And we also organize the many conferences, and one of the biggest conferences, IITE 2010, which was devoted to the teachers' education, policy development, open education resources, and partnership. And also we're working, trying to keep contacts and support the existing UNESCO networks like Associate SchoolNet and UNITWIN and UNESCO chairs. The next the conference will be in December in Baku on teacher education and competency framework for teachers on ICT. Now, concerning to this in relation to this topic of this conference, I would like to turn and focus on two areas which might be interesting for you. The first one, so many speakers this morning spoke about the teachers and training of teachers. There is the great need for teachers to be educated in not only to have the ICT skills, but also to have the knowledge and the skills to integrate ICT in their teaching. And there is need for new pedagogy for ICTs. So in that sense, UNESCO has created the international benchmark which sets out the skills required to teach effectively with ICT. That is called UNESCO ICT Competency Framework for Teachers. This framework emphasizes that it is not enough for teachers to have ICT skills. Teachers need to be able to help the students become more collaborative, problem-solving, creative learners through using ICT. The framework is arranged in three different approaches to teaching. The first one is the technology literacy, enabling students to use ICT in order to learn more efficiently. The second is knowledge deepening, enabling students to acquire in-depth knowledge of their school subjects and apply it to complex real-world problems. The last one is knowledge creation, enabling students and citizens and workforce they became to create new knowledge required for more harmonious, prosperous societies. So this framework will be published and launched during the general conference, which will be held in October in Paris. And UNESCO is providing technical assistance to the member states if they request UNESCO to provide some technical assistance to adapt and use this competency framework as a national standard for teachers. Another issue I would like to raise today is the concept of open educational resources. This is the very emerging concept with great potential to support educational transformation. OER. What is the OER? Open Educational Resources. It's teaching, learning, research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under intellectual property license that permit their free use or repurposing by others. That is the definition. Otherwise, any educational materials which the authors give away to others in order for them to use, reuse, mix, and adapt. What is the benefit of OER? For the individuals, it will give opportunity to learn new things, share and discuss with colleagues, improve their performance, assess and select institutions. For teachers, create course effectively, investigate the ways in which others have taught their subject, create resources in collaboration, join communities. For the institutions, it is the showcase their teaching and research, the widen the pool of applicants, lower the lifetime cost, and also extend outreach activities. There are three dimensions of open educational resources. First, the openness. In the social domain, it's freedom to use, freedom to contribute, freedom to share. In the technical domain, use the open standards, use of open source software. The second dimension is the educational. OER can be used for the formal education, non-formal education, as well as informal education. The last one is the resources. The learning content, for example, MIT OCW. So Massachusetts Institute of Technology already put on this website the 2,000 courses and all materials for free use. The same Paris Tech. The learning objects, I think you know the Merlot and others. The references like wikis and Google Scholars. Tools. There are many tools, CMS, LMS, development tools, implementation resources like licensing tools, Creative Commons, best practices, etc. What is the drivers for open educational resources? First, of course, technological drivers. Increased broadband availability, increased hard drive capacity and processing speed, user-friendly software for creating, editing, remixing. The second is social driver. The digital natives and today's students with substantial ICT skills, desire for interactivity, willingness to share and contribute, and development of communities and collaborative projects. Concerning the economical drivers, that is lower cost for broadband, tools and lower entry barriers, sites and services hosting content for free, new economic models for monetizing user-created content. The last but not least, the legal driver, that is the licenses, open licenses. such as Creative Commons. But the major driving force for OER is the unlocking or opening of the knowledge to as many as possible in as many countries as possible. The motivations producing and sharing open education resources. You can see from the table what are the motivations for the government, for the institutions and the individuals. So during the lunchtime we have discussed a little bit with the rector of the university about the copyright issues. Of course there is some concerns from the universities on that, but such countries like China, they have produced 1,000 so-called national excellency courses. That was the nationwide contest, and they have selected the scholars to write the content and courses, and then evaluation panel selected and improved the content, and at the end the Ministry of Education put all those 1,000 courses free access, for the free access to everybody. So there are a lot of similar initiatives happening around the world. So we in UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies trying to promote and support those institutions to produce the open education resources in their national languages. So these are the main tendency in OER. If this was the grassroots movement, now it became more institution-based initiative, and less text and more videos, for example, iTunes University and animated materials. And also, even I think you heard about that in Australia they have created Open Education Resources University. So that is one of the biggest news for all who are working in this field. So I would like to thank all of you for inviting me and giving me opportunity to say some words about the UNESCO activities in the field of ICT and education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Badaj. Our last presenter today is Mr. Jim Wen, who leads Education Strategy Group at Promethen, a company which is a world leader in the rapidly growing global market for interactive learning technology. Mr. Wen is responsible for the company's strategic thinking in education. Prior to joining Promethen, Mr. Wen led the public sector team in education in the emerging markets public sector practice of the Cisco Internet Business Solutions Group, where he advised government and public sector organizations on the intelligent use of ICTs to transform education. Mr. Wen is also a director of the 21st Century Learning Alliance Board in the United Kingdom. So, Mr. Wen, we're glad to have you among us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I just say a big thank you to the organisers for making today such a successful day. I've really enjoyed myself. I think the organisation has been absolutely perfect, and I'd also like to thank Leeuwards, our partner here in the country, who've really looked after us well. So thank you very much. I used to be a teacher. I actually started teaching in 1976. And I want to tell you about that, but unfortunately this microphone has trapped me to this stand. It doesn't feel very natural for me to stand in one position. I like to move out, and I'd much prefer to be out there working with you and making sure that people aren't surfing the web and looking up football scores and things like that rather than listening to what I'm saying. But I'm stuck here, so I'm going to have to trust that you are all really listening to everything I'm saying. I was just saying to my colleague John before that we're talking about changing practice, and yet here we are using old-fashioned talking from the front at you as an audience, and we've got to try to change that somehow. So maybe next time we can have a roving mic so I can walk around. Maybe? Okay, I'll see how it goes. But I thought I'd start off by talking about my mother. My mother is in her 80s, and unfortunately her legs are not very good and she can't get out of the house anymore. So I bought her a computer about 2 years ago. Now, she has never used the computer at all. I showed her how to use the internet, and I showed her about Google, and she couldn't. The mouse was quite a problem. She would move the mouse with her right hand and take her hand off and move it with the left, and it would do all these funny things. But within a few, she lives in Newcastle in the north of England. I live in the south. And so I rang her and said, "How are you getting on?" She said, I can play checkers online. And in England we call it drafts. And she said to me, "Do you know checkers is the same as drafts, Jim?" I said, "Yeah, I know what checkers is." And she says, "I was playing a guy in Dubai, and he offered me a draw, and I was winning. He's really cheated." She was really annoyed that this guy in Dubai had tried to offer. And I'm thinking, this is amazing, that from nothing, she's using Yahoo checkers to play with somebody she's never met before. Imagine what a leap that was for her. So next time I went to visit, I said, "I'm going to show you something really special now. I'm going to show you Skype." So we installed Skype, and I had my computer with me, and I went upstairs to the bedroom in the house, and we Skyped between the two. And she thought this was amazing. And when the nurse came to see her, she said, "Are you using Skype?" And the nurse said, "What's Skype?" And she said, "Do you know, the nurse didn't even know what Skype was." So I was at work, and I'm in a meeting like this, and my computer, you know, the noise that Skype makes, and I look, it's my mum ringing me. So I said, "Mum, I'm in a meeting now, I really can't talk to you." And she keeps talking. She's got no idea what my job is. So I turn it off. The same thing happens an hour later. Anyway, so I then put away. What is it, away you put on Skype? And my sister rings me about a week later, and she says, "Jim, you're travelling so much." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, Mum says you're always away." I said, "No, it's because she doesn't understand the new ways of working." Now, here's the point of the story. Yesterday I filled up with fuel in England with my car. When I filled it with fuel, on the petrol pump was the amount of fuel. I walked into the petrol station, and on the screen, on the computer screen, there's the amount of petrol that I bought. And the guy behind the desk doing an everyday job is using a computer system to do his job. He's not walking out like people did 20, 30 years ago to write down the thing on the pump. He's using a computer system to do his job. If you're a cleaner in Terminal 5, the British Airways terminal at Heathrow Airport, you pick up your cleaning roster from a computer screen when you get into work in the morning. If you have an operation, you'd be shocked if the surgeon wasn't using some form of IT. John was telling me about his dad's just been seriously ill, and he was suspended with lights and LEDs flashing. You would actually be shocked if it wasn't like that anymore. In a bank, you would be amazed if they pulled a cardboard box out of a drawer with your money in it. It wouldn't be like that. Why is it that education is the last part of human endeavour, from the petrol pump to the cleaner to the bank to the surgery? Why is it that ICT is not ubiquitous in every single classroom on the planet? That's what I'm concerned about. Now, my background is I started teaching in 76. I was very lucky to go to a school where they had a teletype. Now, a lot of you aren't old enough to know what a teletype is, but it's a typewriter which is connected to a mainframe computer. This one was 50 miles away, 60, 70 kilometers away. And my first day as a student teacher, I saw another teacher teaching a class how to program in BASIC. So the teacher typed, do you remember 10 space print quotes, Simon Ball School, that was the name of the school, quote, return, 20 space, go to 10, enter, run. Do you remember what happens? Simon Ball School, Simon Ball School. And the teacher would stand and wait. And suddenly a student would say, "How do you stop it, sir?" And he'd pull the plug out of the wall. And someone said, "That can't be right." He said, "Exactly." And he gave them all the manual and said, "Work out how to do it properly." So on my very first day of teaching, I saw somebody doing experiential learning. Because the other classes were being taught all the different words in the language. So I was very lucky to pick up on that very first day something about how to teach in a rounded way. And now that's followed me. I went to my next school where I became head teacher. And I flooded it with ICT, and if we had time I could tell you about all the mistakes I made. I made so many terrible mistakes. This was in about 1988. But I started working with the British Council, and in fact they had me advise different governments from Russia to India and so on. And I found that the problems were very common everywhere I went. People were worried about the technology rather than, as the competency framework for teachers from UNESCO is pointing out, about at least 6 different strands of expertise, from policy through to technology to pedagogy, assessment and curriculum and so on. It's a complicated thing. So Promethean approached me about a year and a half ago and said, "Look, we're beginning to get known as an interactive whiteboard company, whereas really we're an education company. We employ over 50% of our staff have got an education background. But we weren't really doing enough to tell the story. So my job was to try to work out how we can go back out to our customers and governments and so on and let them know all the things that we know in Promethean, because we work in over 100 countries around the world. We have a huge base and it's pure education technology, so we've got a lot of experience. I was recently in Brazil, and the Minister of Education from Paraguay wanted to know from his audience where he should start tackling this problem of ICT. Was the problem to do with infrastructure in its widest sense, about the connectivity of schools, about the devices children have got in their hands, about the devices teachers have got? Or is it all about this education for the 21st century? Whatever that means, that's complicated according to who you talk to, but in terms of today's conference, it's certainly about doing something about maths and science, technology and engineering. Is it about worrying about the supply of skills into the economy? Or is it about the digital divide and the digital society, about people like my mum? If it hadn't been for me, she wouldn't be anywhere near the world. And, by the way, my mum orders everything online now. She just has got used to it. She just does it all. And she hasn't used a printer yet after 2 years. And I said, "Well, use it." She said, "I'll do that when I get around to it. It's okay." But this divide, if you're not part of the digital society, you can't get a hold of a lot of information which is useful for you to carry out your life. And we actually voted on that. So maybe tomorrow I might pass back the information about where it was a meeting of the Inter-America Development Bank. So all the ministers were there from Latin America. And it was quite interesting about where they thought they had to focus their attention. But I'll leave that to people to catch me. One of the problems, of course, is what people promise that technology can do and what it can achieve. Back in the 80s, when I was doing a lot of this work, I would say that a lot of technologists lied about what technology could do because their dreams ran faster than reality. So just as a test, let's see if you can guess when this person made this quote. So I don't know if the interpreters can just read that to the non-English speaking people in the room, please. And I'll give you 2 minutes to read that. And just think about when this was said. I've changed the words slightly. So it's predicting Skype and things like that. Now, if I had one of our audience response units in each person's hand, you could all be voting now and we could look at it, but I'm afraid I haven't. We've been using them in the last session very successfully, but at this point, if I was better organised, you'd all be voting and telling me what you thought. Would anybody like to shout out a date? What year did somebody make that quote? Don't be shy, come on. You're not going home until somebody answers. Just say a date, please. You're scared. You see, John is right, isn't it? If you had these voting devices, people wouldn't be so shy. They'd all be guessing now. Shall I tell you anyway? 1906, 105 years ago, people were predicting. They didn't even have fax then, yet somebody was predicting teleconferencing and its use in surgery, in clinicians. And we still haven't got that everywhere today, have we? 105 years later. So a word of warning is, beware of the technologists. Beware of Promethean telling you that everything will work like it should. We should be working together on making sure that we tackle the real problems. So I get into Promethean and I have to think about how to help the company gather its information together so that we can help our clients get the best out of their technology. So I thought I'll start off with as simple a picture as I possibly can. In my last headship, I said to my teachers, you know, your job is actually really easy. All you have to know is, for each of your learners, what position they are in their learning. You have to assess what their potential is. And all your job is, as the educator, is plot the path between the position and the potential. And I said to my staff, position, path, potential. Position, path, that's all you have to do. But then, of course, you know what they say. I've got a class of 32, Jim. The marking I have to do, I've got 6 classes of 30 children. I've got 180 children. I can't mark the work each day to find out what their position is or their potential, because all we do is a test at the end of each month or the end of a term. So there's a really big issue. We need to work out what the things are that stop teachers being good at their jobs. I mean, here in Latvia, I know you have quite small class sizes in some of the rural schools, but it isn't the same in the town. They can be 30, 32, I think. In Africa, I was in a class on the Ugandan-Kenya border last November, 103 children in one class. How could that poor teacher possibly personalise the learning at all? How could that poor teacher do it? I think you can't actually do it for 20 or 25. And this is where I think we have to really think about how can we help. That's it, isn't it? That's the job of an educator. How can we help with technology make that cycle work is what we're trying to do. Now there's another problem. Because whether or not you even go to school or you're living in Africa, you are bombarded with wonderful media and technology now. You drive through Nairobi and you will see big hoardings which are now dynamic. You can't avoid, no matter how poor you are from a township in Africa, you will still understand this new multimedia world. You're being hit from every corner. In the developed world, of course, people have got, you know, the riots in the UK were driven by free messaging on Blackberries. Those kids knew exactly what they were doing. They were completely savvy, and the police were running around behind because the police were not as savvy as the kids were at texting each other. What happens when they go into an ordinary classroom? They get boring stuff. They get a teacher writing with chalk on a board, and you know, their attention span is seconds, and they're meant to sit at 10 o'clock in the morning the next day and think about science. Or 11 o'clock will now change to maths. And if you've not seen Ken Robinson's video, you really must. I've got three videos, and you've all got copies of the presentation, so the YouTube connection's on the bottom of my slide. But Ken Robinson talks about this whole problem of attention span and what neuroscience is saying is happening to the synaptics in people's brains because of the life they have outside of the classroom. And when they come into the classroom, they're told to be quiet. They're being hit by everything outside. They're told to sit down and take their pills and focus. In fact, do you understand, is the drug Ritalin used in your part of the world? It certainly is huge in America and in the UK, where children who are naughty are given Ritalin to calm them down. And Ken has done some work which plots the use of technology against the numbers of prescriptions for Ritalin that are issued to children. And he thinks there's a connection. There's a connection between schools making kids get bored because they're not changing quickly enough. So I'm taking this as input into my thinking about how to help the company form a strategic plan. And I go off and I read this McKinsey report. This McKinsey report, written just a few years ago, cost $1 million to write. And do you know what the conclusion was? The way to have a best performing school is A, to have a really good principal, but most importantly, have really good teachers. And if you're a teacher, you think, wow, tell me something new. But this is a really important thing, because other people are saying teachers are a thing of the past. We can get rid of teachers and send kids home to learn. This report is really important because people are out there to get rid of schools. Schools, I think, will be there for a long time yet. They have a really important purpose. So instead of putting students at the middle of our picture, we have to put teachers at the middle of our picture. It's teachers we have to look after and work out what their problems are. So I came up with this set of themes, and I call them the themes that matter. And in the middle of the themes that matter, I pulled out 3 overarching themes that drive everything. Again, if we had voting units, I was going to ask people to vote on the middle 3, A, B, or C, as which they think is most important. So you might think which is most important to you, but I'll start off with C. That especially today in the economic climate that we're in, we can't avoid linking education performance to the economic growth. And by that, take that as a subtext for social cohesion as well. We must understand, I know in Latvia you have a problem with too few people going into vocational education. What can we do about encouraging less people to go to university and more people to become plumbers, frankly? That seems to be the way we have to think. In England, we're supporting a project called Bloodhound. We have a mad English person who wants to drive a car at 1,000 miles an hour. It's got a Eurofighter jet engine in the car, and a rocket, and a Formula 1 engine, and he's going to drive this car at 1,000 miles an hour. And why are we supporting it? Because we think it might stimulate children into finding engineering interesting again. It's called the Apollo effect. Back in 1969, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, many more people took up engineering degrees and vocational subjects than had been done previously. So we have to think about doing things like that to stimulate the right match between education output and the economy. A above says collaboration and personalization. I think this is hugely important. I've now worked for Microsoft, for Cisco, and now Promethean. The way, and back in the 70s, I worked for a company in the northeast of England doing engineering. The difference is enormous now. You're expected to be flexible, you work all the hours there are, you change your job every 2 minutes. Knowing how to collaborate is a crucial skill. But I think it's always been a crucial skill. It isn't a 21st century skill at all. It's a skill we always should have had. And personalization, of course, is all about my position path potential diagram. I can't do position path potential for 30 kids, otherwise they all just get the middle. I have to think about how to personalize what's happening. It's in a very, very important area to focus on. Now, some people call those 2 words part of the 21st century curriculum. And I challenge people to say it's not. It's what we should be doing anyway. 21st century learning is about treating learning like a business. We wouldn't survive as a business unless we thought about what was working and what wasn't working, and making decisions all the time to keep us alive as a business and keep us growing. I don't see that that's any different to health, where a doctor doesn't give drugs without measuring your pulse or your heart rate or taking some measurement and making a decision. That's a business approach. Otherwise, you just give somebody drugs and see what happens. It's not how it's, well, it might be how it's done, but it shouldn't be how it's done. So those are the 3 driving themes, and the precipitation of those themes are real action themes. Teacher effectiveness. Where in a teacher's job are they finding it hard to teach? Curriculum development. How can we use technology to support all these changes that we're seeing to different ways to teach? By the way, I don't know if this will work, but I found someone showed me an examination paper the other day with a right-angled triangle. And on one side it had 3 centimeters, and on the bottom side it said 4, and then on the hypotenuse, the longer side, it said X centimeters. And the question was, find X. And a student circled it and said, here it is. It doesn't always work in translation, but teachers have got a great job to do in terms of communication of ideas and so on. Technology can really help. The serious point of what I'm saying is, when you have a difficult concept to portray, something like an interactive whiteboard or a learner response system can be the way of really helping bring that curriculum to life. I don't think there is enough attention to assessment. People talk about e-content, and it's all about content for the teacher to teach with or the student to learn with. That's not enough to do position path potential. You need feedback. And you need assessment that will help the teacher decide what next to do for me as the learner. And we find differentiated content is becoming common. Content, Gardner's multiple intelligences started us thinking back in the 90s about different ways to look at content. But where is the work where people are looking at differentiated assessment? It's really missing. And if we can link, when you go to Amazon and you buy a book, and it says people who bought this book also bought this book, why is that any different to learning? Imagine if that book was a piece of learning content, and you're the learner, and you get that piece of learning content, and Amazon says, do you know, people who learned using this also like learning using this? A synaptic approach to it. Now that's really where we need to head, because that would free the teacher from thinking about the content and focus on being an educator. But only if that loop's there. Now, if you get that right, that enables number 4, which is data-driven decision-making. You Google data-driven decision-making, you'll find millions of references to health. You will find next to none for education. This is crazy. It's the only way you can get to point 5, student achievement, is if you can make decisions about the student's progress through position, path, potential. And of course, if you get that right, they can launch themselves into the education continuum and keep learning forever. Now, all of that forms Promethean's themes, and if you go to prometheanworld.com/education, you'll find some white papers that we've written around these issues. I'll stress that they're purely written about education. There's no sales there at all. We don't mention any products. It really is about trying to make people think more deeply about assessment and productivity and things like that. So please visit that site. One of the other holes in education technology is that you can't get diagrams like this. This is a diagram from Gartner that talks about how technology is adopted in business. It talks about 5 stages. That's just on that 3rd line at the bottom. Stage 1 is when there's a technology trigger. Somebody talks about technology and people start to get excited. Then they start lying. And you reach a peak of inflated expectations when you think it's going to do much more than it actually does. What follows after that is what they call a trough of disillusionment, when you actually get fed up about all the fibbing and you try to work out what it is that the technology will do. But because you've been through that curve, you enter what they call the slope of enlightenment before you reach the plateau of productivity. And what this diagram plots, and you've all got a copy in your pack, is where Gartner thinks different technologies are on this very important adoption curve. Now, what nobody's done is think about where education technologies are on that curve, because where they are on that curve will determine how you help teachers get round that curve. It's very important. So, for example, I challenged the company to say, okay, we want to sell loads of these. Where are they? Where is one of these units on this adoption? And it's different in different countries. And it's even different in different schools within the same country, and it's even different within the school. So you might find the maths department wants to use it, but another department at all. So it's complicated. So I'm trying to talk to Gartner about working out how we can help people know how to adopt technology in a measured way. So it isn't about, oh, this is fantastic, come and use it. We need to help people go through that. The other problem, of course, is in terms of diversity. Classrooms are not as different as they might be today. One of the challenges to schools, and it's quite an indictment, if you took a teacher from 100 years ago and put them in a schoolroom today, they wouldn't see any difference. There's lots of versions of that story. But if you took a surgeon from 100 years ago and put them in an operating theatre, it would be completely different. Guaranteed. There are differences though. I mean, even, you probably can't see it, but on the left-hand side, the middle picture, I'm sorry it's not any bigger. I took that picture in a classroom in Beijing, where that particular school just copies textbooks and puts them on their computer system, and kids just use a mouse to read the screen. There were no keyboards in the shot. If your eyesight's good, you'll see there were no keyboards. And when I was in the room, I thought, there's something strange. I can't work out what's wrong. But they're not used. So I wouldn't call that a good example of ICT. But compared to the diversity in the world of work, of course, what's the point of education if it's not partly to get kids ready for the world of work? The diversity between what's happening in the classroom and the world of work is a real problem. And of course, technology can bring access to diversity by taking children into virtual worlds and exposing them to different things. So that diversity really is a big problem. And of course, outside of the classroom, there are examples today already of this particular learner who's interested in chemistry, going off to a chemistry club with MIT, going down to Second Life, and this is actually happening in some places, not everywhere. Don't think I'm a nerd. I know there are millions of people not doing this, but there are people doing it. That's the point. Now, have a think about re-engineering education. Let's have a think about re-engineering the curriculum. Let's have a think about a brand new architecture for the curriculum. Let's start again. The red line is my learning journey in time. I'm the learner moving along that path. I go to school and I do other things. And the bit above the line is the virtual world, and below the line is my normal school world. Both exist, right? And in the virtual world, I'm probably already making friends with other people that might be in my tutor group, or my subject group, or my project group. There might be people that aren't even in my school I'm being friends with. But I might have professionals lurking in this virtual world. My tutor might actually go on Facebook and know that I'm there. My mentor is somebody who has a different view of me, or my assessor. And what's probably happening is that the use of space and time and resource is moving between the two worlds. So for example, I might go to a class and I didn't quite get it, so I go onto YouTube and I find a video. And I just go and do it. So in between my lessons, I have a physical class, and I go off and I go to YouTube and I do my teacher doesn't even know what's going on. And I go back to my class and I get assessed. Imagine if we knew that was going on and we could actually monitor the fact by having a video comprehension that we put on YouTube that we know fits with the course. I could then spot the student did it overnight, and then the class the next day be completely different in what my interaction was with the student. Let's just make it a lot more complicated. In the class, I introduce an expert by telepresence, by video conferencing. I plan to have multimedia that the expert introduces that fits with my class. The multimedia's got practice materials in it. There's a research task I've got to carry out. There's a reinforcement video that I mentioned earlier. I go back and use the multimedia again, and then I come back to my class, again with this expert who joins the class by video. Look at what's possible. Look at how much is above the line compared to below the line. It's quite interesting, and the older a student gets, the more you can push above the line to below the line, which changes the whole business model and the learning model. But equally, can you see that in this diagram? I've not talked about the learning objectives, I've talked about the learning modalities. Reinforcement, research, group work, all these different things. These are learning modalities. What I'm like to challenge people with is to think about which modalities live where, rather than where the content is. I think the content is just a little bit too easy. I think I'm probably a long time, not too bad over time. The other thing is that things are changing in business, I'd just like to compare school and business in terms of learning. If you think about business, business often just wants to teach people hard skills that are going to help the company sell more things. That's at the top. I want you to be more productive. At the bottom, education is about personal development, much more touchy-feely. So top right-hand corner, the worst sort of business training is really hard-nosed. I'm going to teach you how to sell. I'm going to drive this training by the commercial imperatives, and I see you, the worker, just as a piece of capital. In education, of course, bottom left-hand corner, touchy-feely, philosophical, academic, driven by my desire to make you, the learner, really work well. Now, the truth is, we can learn from each other. Personal development has to be a function of better informed decisions. That's what I was arguing earlier. And business does that really well. And business is beginning to wake up to the fact that effective business is a function of talent management. The better you look after your human capital, the better you get on. So I'm seeing this crossover going on between different places. Now, in business, they are well used to using IT in training. It's everywhere. In fact, what's happening in training now is that it's more online. In fact, they're buying courses from other people. They're written in a very efficient way. It really is a real mashup of different technology. The classroom doesn't look like the classroom that you might expect in a school. And this is a real example of a training course for nurses from Ireland, where I'll just click through. But basically, Sarah here in this example wants to retrain to be an operating theatre nurse. She's a ward nurse at the moment. And she has 3 aspects to her training, which she can take anytime she wishes. There's a 24/7 live person at the end of a phone. There's multimedia, which matches in with the course. And there's a social networking site where she can talk about her problems to fellow people. That synchronicity between the different modalities of learning is happening now. And I think schools can learn a lot from what's happening in places like that. And of course, business has been a real leader. Even back in the days of green screen PCs that couldn't do much, they were being adopted by business to improve productivity. And that has happened. And in business, ICT is just ubiquitous. None of us wouldn't go around without our iPad or a BlackBerry to do our job. None of us. So the challenge is, why is that not happening in education? Another big trend, therefore, I think, is that education is going to be seen as a service. EAAS, education as a service. It'll be a virtual service provision, VSP. These are new phrases that you might not have come across before. Education as a service basically looks at the demand side and what people want and goes off and finds it on the supply side. And it's a bit like a virtual port. It's a bit like Hong Kong or Singapore. Instead of bringing in raw goods, they're bringing in learning goods and repackaging them and sending them out and completely changing the business model in total. So it's all happening. So why is it not happening in schools? Well, for one really big reason, and I've said this to 1 or 2 people I've met the last few days. Imagine you're the Minister for Education and you sat alongside the Minister for Transport in a meeting with the Minister for Finances. And you're both arguing for $1 billion. I want to equip all the schools with Promethean's whiteboards because they're so wonderful. And I want to build a bridge. I want to equip classrooms. The guy building the bridge can produce a report that says, if you build a bridge, it will have this impact on the economy. We'll have 20 businesses per kilometre of road. And the Minister of Finance gets it. The Minister of Education can't make the same argument at all. There's so little research done about the impact that technologies can have on learning and therefore the impact on the economy. But it's there. For example, Bob Marzano in Seattle has done some research, and I'll tell you, I'll send you all it, or you can find it online, but this is what the research says. You can get 4 years education in 3 if you use technology properly. 4 in 3. Huge. People don't believe it, but he's done it. 5,000 students over 3 years, 170 odd teachers and 73 schools. The research is there. So one of my jobs is to find work like that and build the credibility of the argument through thought leadership. That's one of my jobs. I think I need to do it for the whole industry, because the whole industry needs to talk like this, otherwise we're not going to get the Minister of Finance allocating money. My acronyms in the what line are: I'm producing white papers and points of view and case studies and value propositions to a wide range of audiences to try to get people to understand what I call the value proposition. Why is it worth doing? So in my team, and here's a call to you, if you have a white paper that you want to write which says something fundamentally important about education that can show the benefit of working this way, then talk to me, because we might be able to work together on producing a document that makes people see what the benefits are. The result of all that work means that we are now working with a strategic alliance of the Gates Foundation and Cisco and a few other bodies to advise governments from Australia through to Finland and South Korea on thinking more deeply about matters like that. In fact, if you go to our website, you'll see the papers are called Deeper Thinking Papers. We're very proud to actually be invited, as small company as we are, to join that group. And it's because really we've got 6 things that we need to think about. We need to think about this issue of diversity of skills and equipment. We need to think about the changing face of education, the whole lifelong learning set of issues. What does the classroom look like today? The synchronicity of all the different moving parts, and the ubiquity that will no doubt catch up, and that virtual circle that, if you recognise all of those parts, can make a big difference to our success using education technology. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wynne, for a very comprehensive presentation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the first day of the Science and Technology Education Summit in Riga is almost over. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank you for your participation and once again kindly invite you for the reception at the small guild hall at 8 o'clock in the evening. The organizers of the summit would like to invite you also to attend the exhibition at the premises of the Daile Theatre tomorrow, starting 10 o'clock. At midday, the official exhibition ceremony will be opened by the President of the Republic of Latvia, His Excellency Mr. Andris Bērziņš. So once again, thank you for staying with us today and for being with us today, and see you tomorrow and today in the evening. Thank you.